In this Bitwig Studio video, we'll be talking about the operators, so what they are and how to use them. And then at the end of the video, I'll give my own opinion on whether or not this is a feature that I would incorporate into my own workflow. And like always, I encourage all those Bitwig users out there watching the video, please share your own experiences. Do you use them? Do you not use them? How? Why? All that stuff. And that's typically the best way for us to learn and to figure out different and unique ways to take advantage of some of these cool and unique features inside of Bitwig Studio. First things first, where do we go to actually find the operators settings and what can they be used on? So the operators can be used at the event level, like the most micro level in Bitwig. So we have our clips that exist here, and then whatever is stored inside of those clips, that is where we'll find the operators, as long as we have either one note selected, one audio event selected, or a combination. So we can apply changes to multiple notes or multiple little audio snippets all at the same time. The operators are really just 4 different sets of instructions that you can either use independently or you can combine to do things that you yourself as an individual probably couldn't do manually. So you can get some really interesting results, or in some cases, it can have a very practical application. So let's just go over them very quickly. The first one is chance, and chance is just, is the event going to happen? Yes or no? What is the percentage of that chance? So obviously, if we're at 50%, that's saying that 50% of the time it's going to trigger, 50% of the time it's not going to trigger. And of course, that doesn't mean that it will trigger once and then not trigger the next time. It's just a random chance. And we'll talk more about that, of course. The next one is the repeat. This is more of like a sound designy thing, or sometimes you could use it to kind of create a roll very quickly. So let's imagine that this was like, let's just do it on this one. Let's imagine that this was a hi-hat and we wanted to create a roll effect. We could turn on the repeats and you can see that we're then splitting the note, and let's just put it to like a really high number. And then we can kind of change the offset of that so that as it gets closer and closer to the end, you know, they're starting to roll faster and faster and faster. And then you can even change the velocity and do a little curvature thing happening. Hopefully you can see that down below. So that's the way that that repeat works. If you get really wild and crazy with it, you can also kind of do some sound designy stuff. So we will explore that. The next one is the if-then logic, which is just, you know, your very basic kind of formula. So for example, if we had if on first, this is saying when I play this back, it will play the first time, but then every other time it's not going to play. So very basic, and there's several different options there that we'll look at. And then finally, we have the recurrence. And now this one's the one that's like really kind of practical, in that if we know that this is going to probably play for a long time over and over again, and we only want it to maybe happen the first time and then not happen the next 3 times, we could set something up like that for, again, like a crash symbol or some kind of other special effect. And what that would allow you to then do is not have to create like an 8-bar loop where really only a couple times are things changing. You could keep it consolidated and then just have it, you know, kind of set up down here. So those are the operators at a glance. The one clip level setting that you need to be aware of and think about as you're working with these operators, especially if you're dealing with any kind of chance, is what the chance mode is you're using. Are you using the dice mode, which is regenerating a new seed every time the clip gets triggered? Or are you using like a predefined selected seed that you generate? Now, there's still a ton of randomness involved to this. It's not like this is necessarily going to be a repeatable result, but what's important is that if you're doing production and you're doing stuff like expanding, what we see is when we're on that dice mode, the result is different. And that could be problematic depending on what other things you're adjusting and why you're expanding. So in the case of production, I think using the seed mode does make a little more sense, because now when we expand twice, what we're going to see is an identical result. So that might be something that you need to look into and think about if you are actually using this in a real production. So just something to be aware of. And you can always take that seed and you can copy and paste that to any clip if you want to use the same seed, you know, across various clips, again, just to help you with some sort of consistency as it relates to chance. So we've already looked at it, but chance is the easiest one to understand and explain. So basically I can choose either, on a note by note basis or multiple notes, what the percentage chance is of that note triggering, or it would work exactly the same way with audio events. What's the odds of that audio event playing or not playing? So when we're down to 50%, we'll be able to hear.
Let's go. Let's go.
Okay, so that's really straightforward. The one thing that I find kind of cool, and you've probably seen this before if you've ever messed around with the expressions, is that you can actually bring out a histogram here, and then with all of these selected, you can offset their chance values. So for example, we can introduce like a bunch of chaos. If we want to spread it further or bring them closer together and adjust the mean value, we can do all of that. So now that I've done that, we can see that we're getting different types of like icons, and hopefully you can see some of these have like 3, some have 5. That's directly related to the percentage of the chance of it playing. This one, for some reason, we turned off. I'm not sure why. Let's turn it back on. This one, I guess we also turned off. We'll turn it back on. And we can then see as we go and we click through that we are getting different values. If, for example, we always want to make sure that the kick drum is just playing straight through, I'll just select those and then I will actually just turn it off. And now we can hear the result that we get. And because you see with these hats, there's a lot that have like 4 or 5 little dots. We're hearing a lot more of these hats coming through than we are, say, the cymbal crash or that little vocal hit.
Let's go.
The next operator we'll look at is repeat. So it's going to stay contained within the event or within the note length. So that's the first thing to point out. So if I go and I select this, this is only going to split up and break up over this duration of time unless I was to go in there and adjust things. So let's go ahead and let's like bring on just like 4 to start, and let's listen to the result. Let's take it a little bit further. Let's bring it up to 8.
Let's go. Let's go.
And then we also have this ability to kind of like offset the auto fade. So you'll really hear this when you bring the value up a little bit. So one hand, it will sound almost like a straight piece of audio. On the other, it's going to become a little more hi-hatty. So let's bring it to one extreme first. We'll bring it all the way down to 0. And now this next time around, we'll have it all the way up to its highest setting.
Let's go. Let's go.
And then let's start to sway these over.
Let's go.
Let's bring it like to here. That sounds kind of cool. And then we can take this a lot further too. So for example, I could go into like the stretch mode, and let's bring this all the way out, make it a little more interesting. And then let's really crank this up.
Let's go.
What I'd also like to do is maybe change the mode that we're using and just see what we can get.
Let's go.
That's kind of cool. And then, you can go in and you can play around with things like formant or pitch. That's kind of fun. And with formant, we can also go, I believe, a little bit further and go kind of crazy with it and do a bit of spread action too, give us some variety. Let's watch it when it comes back around.
Let's go.
So that's kind of awesome and cool. So that's like a little bit of a sound design technique you can do. Totally up to you how you want to play around with it. What we'll also do is we'll look at it in a note example. So maybe with like this third little kick drum here, we'll do again kind of more of a sound designy thing. And let's reverse that by bringing this down and then bringing this value up. Yep, something like that.
Let's go.
And then because that one's a little bit more unique, maybe we would combine that with the chance operator and just bring this down so that it's not playing every single time.
Let's go.
Cool. So that is how you work with repeat. So right now we're having the chance operator act on the crash and on the little vocal chant thing. But what would make a little bit more sense is to probably use the if-then conditional logic. So let's go ahead and take both of those and we'll just turn off the chance that they're going to play every time no matter what. And then with the crash, I think what would make the most sense is to have this play on the first go around. And for the vocal chant so that it doesn't get in the way of the crash, we would tell this one to never play on the first go round. So let's take a listen.
Let's go. Let's go.
And then if I ever was to re-trigger the clip,
Let's go.
we get it to repeat that effect. And again, we can always combine this with other things. So we could combine it with the chance operator. So with the cymbal, I don't think I would, but for the little vocal hit, maybe we would do something like that so that we know it's never going to play the first time, but then it's not necessarily going to play every single time as well after the first one. So we heard it didn't play that time, and that time it did. We can see the little black border indicating whether it is or isn't going to play. The next ones are our with previous or without previous. So again, you can make all this stuff very complicated if you want to. We'll just look at a really simple example of that with these claps here. So with previous plays when the last event did. So for example, I'll put this one on and we're going to change it to plays with previous. So assuming that this one plays, this one is going to play. If this one does not play, this one is not going to play. So if we go back into here and bring on like the chance of 50%, we'll now be able to hear the times that it does play versus when it doesn't. So either we're going to hear everything or we're not going to hear the two that are happening in the middle. So that did not play.
Let's go.
This time they're all going to play. And you can see that we get the outline and the little purple thing appearing when it is going to play. So let's see if this time it won't. Yep, and it turned those off. So there you go. Very, very straightforward and easy. So what I might do is bring this one on as well. And this time we're going to choose without previous. Okay, so now these are all kind of linked together. So if this one does not play, because this one does not play, this one will then play. And this is just easier demonstrated listening than trying to talk it out.
Let's go.
Okay, so we'll have the same result. All right, this one will be different. We'll hear two claps at the end.
Let's go.
So if you noticed with our audio events, we don't have all of the settings that we have with notes. So let's go over into our polysynth now, and we'll see one of the new modes that gets brought up for us is with previous key or without previous key. And that basically works exactly the same way as with or without the last event. So what I can do is I could set this up so that, you know, we give it 50% or less chance of happening. And then let's set these two to do plays when this last, yeah. So we'll do what we did before with previous key. So if this one plays, these two will play. If this one does not play, these two will not play. Hopefully it will actually play at some point. There we go. And then in the second half, we could maybe do something more interesting, like just kind of at a random point. We'll again put this chance down to like 50%, and then we'll just kind of do the inverse for a few of these other notes. And this will be without previous key. And then again, let's adjust another one, bring its percentage down to like 50%. And let's choose the same setting here. All right, and now we'll get to hear a good amount of variety as we go and we play through.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Very cool. So you can see, I mean, the real value here is in percussion, or, you know, again, if you just were building something out and you pretty much put notes on everything, if you want to get a little bit of that nice little randomness and variety and sync it up with other things, you can very easily do that here. The other two settings are pretty similar with previous channel or without previous channel. So if you really wanted to get fancy, what you could do is you could like go into a clip like this one, and you can see that I've set the D2 note to go to channel 2, but then everything else here is on channel 1. So if I was to set this particular note, which is also on channel 1, and I say with the previous channel, we're getting that same setup, but no matter what, this one's going to play. So like you could kind of do some creative and interesting things with this if you wanted to. So let's again just go and put this down to like 50%. So if it does play, we're going to expect to also hear this one. If it doesn't play, we're just going to kind of hear these two. And then, you know, without previous channel would be kind of like the same thing. So this is on channel 1. So we'll say without previous channel. So that gives you an idea of how that's working. Again, straightforward as long as you know how you want to interpret and play around. There might be some other really cool things you could do with it. So this would be the one where if anybody out there does really creative and crazy stuff with the channel stuff, please do share that in the comment section. We're going to come back to these two fill modes in just a second, but before we do that, let's jump over to recurrence, which is something you can use either very creatively or very practically. So this right here is just going to be a very practical example where with the crash, I'm just going to have it play the first time the loop goes around and then not play for the next 3. And we can track that down here.
Let's go. Let's go.
And that's how that's pretty much working. Now, again, you could get really creative with this and set various like intervals and you know, determining if it is or isn't going to play, you know, randomly. And so you could really generate some wild stuff with that without having to draw out and create, you know, a really complicated and long MIDI clip, for example. And just an FYI, that one will also work with audio events. So let's do something like 7. And let's just listen and see what happens.
Let's go. Let's go.
So that gives you the idea again of how you can just kind of push this out further and again get very different and unique rhythms depending on how you set it up. Admittedly, I was very lazy. I just went into the clip browser and searched for like a drum fill clip, and this is what we have here. So if I want to take advantage of that fill mode in the if-then logic, I can choose when fill is on, and you can turn fill on and off here. You can map it to something, but basically, unless that's clicked, we're not going to hear it. So this second time around, maybe we'll want to hear it. Okay, so that's how that works. And then the other one that we have is the fill off, right? So basically, those events are going to not play when we have the fill mode turned on is the way you can think about it. So maybe we just want to make sure that none of these notes are going to play whenever we do, and it's going to end up overwriting some other stuff. So yeah, we'll just choose them anyway, just for the sake of example. And here we will choose fill off. So plays when fill mode is off. So these are going to play when the fill mode is off. When the fill mode comes on, they are not going to play.
Let's go.
And here we go. This time we'll do it. And you could hear that those all turned off then when we had this fill mode turned on. So that is the way that those operators work. It's also worth mentioning that you can use the fill just as like a modulator as well. So like when fill turns on, maybe we just want to like turn these drums down. So this is like an extreme example, but just to show you that fill mode can be used in other places. So there you go. Just some examples there of what you can do. One thing I should point out here at the end is that you can expand your results. And so you can basically bounce this out and see what happens. Or if you don't want to bounce out the chants, you don't have to do that. Or if you don't want to bounce out the spreads that you've set up, you don't have to do that. So obviously, if you're working on a production, eventually you're going to want to do that because you don't want to leave that randomness in there for whenever you bounce, your track at the end. And then the result is not going to be repeatable. For live performance, not really as big of an issue, but for actual production, it's something to be made aware of. So would I actually use the operators? I would say for the most part, probably not. And the reason is just that when I'm producing, I'm usually doing it with intention. So I know exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. And a lot of the stuff with the operators here is it might be more time consuming to set something up that you are doing with intention versus going for more of like that randomness or that little bit of interest to be sparkled in. I'm sure there's situations like if you're bringing in like a percussion sound or a bunch of different like glitch sounds or something, you could definitely take advantage of these and get the result that you want or get something really cool and interesting. The one thing I probably would see myself using is the recurrence. So instead of having to create a lot of like 8-bar loops where there's only just a tiny bit of variation, across different parts, you could go in, throw that recurrence on there, set it to 8, and just determine, when you do or don't want those particular sounds playing or triggering. But in general, this is like a very Bitwig effect, a very Bitwig feature that's super cool, but it's just hard to see yourself using it if you really are setting out with a plan, like exactly what you're trying to create. So of course, what I'd love to hear from everybody out there in the comments is if you do use the operators, how do you use them? When do you use them? Or if you've been using Bitwig for a long time and you never use the operators, you should share that experience as well so that everybody can kind of get a feel for, are people using these? Are they not? We all know it's a very cool feature. It's just the question of how are you incorporating it into your workflow. So thank you for watching this Bitwig Studio video on the operators, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.